Before we start the meeting, can I draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me, and I hope on the other screens in the chamber. Can you ensure, all of you, that your mobile phones are switched to silent or are turned off? And can you make sure that your card is firmly pushed into the console so that we can hear you on the webcast? I don't think I need to remind the member of the public how to behave at a planning meeting. And so can we move straight on to the items of business? The minutes of the last meeting, they have been laid out. I take it, Emma. Has anyone wish to comment, or can we agree those minutes? Agree. Apologies for absence, Emma.
We have apologies from Councillors Peter Ishwood and David Round. And Christian Hesse, possibly, sometimes he's a little bit later. But,
any declarations of interest, Sam?
None before the meeting, but I believe Hazelmere Town Councillors declare a non-pecuniary interest.
One thing I forgot to do was introduce the officers, and so could I do that now? Thank you, Steve, for putting that on. We have on my far right Lewis Jones from the Legal Department. Next to him, Steve Weaver, our Interim Development Control Manager. Louise Jandel, our team leader for Southern and Western, and a new face certainly to me and perhaps to some other, Olivia Gorham, who's going to be presenting to us at the next meeting. So she's come to see just how awful we are before she comes to present. So welcome, Olivia. I hope you enjoy the experience. Any questions from the public? Did I ask you that, Emma?
None received.
Steve, then, any relevant updates, please? And you're going to tell us about PIPs. Only the government could come up with another totally different item, which has the same acronym as something equally as important. But there you go. Can you tell us about PIPs, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Members, you may be aware I sent out an email yesterday afternoon relating to this particular matter. I just wanted to briefly touch upon it in case you hadn't had a chance to catch up with that. Yes, it's the new regime or an alternative regime of applying for planning permission known as Permissions in Principle, or PIPs. It's come into effect at the start of this month, and it applies to small-scale housing-led developments of up to 9 dwellings. It's a little bit like an outline and reserve matters arrangement, whereby you are dealing with matters of principle first and detail thereafter. But the timescales and the scope associated with PIP applications are much more truncated. We've only got 5 weeks to consider them, and the scope of our consideration is only limited to matters of location, land use and amount of development. Clearly, this is a drive by the government to make it easier for small-scale developments to get off the launch pad, so to speak, in principle, before the work is done on the more detailed matters of design, transport, drainage, etc., etc. So as well as challenging timescales for determination, we also have challenging timescales to advertise applications. There is publicity given to them, but unlike the normal minimum 21 days for a normal application, it's only 14 days for PIP applications. We are going to be writing to neighbours. We don't have to do that. We are only required by the regulations to display a site notice, but it's been agreed we will write to neighbours about PIP applications. And clearly, you may well receive queries if we get any. We haven't got any yet. You may get queries from residents about what's this all about. What I'd recommend, this is new territory for all of us, is that you do get in contact with the case officers if you do have any queries on any given proposals, and we will do our best to assist. As I say, we've only got 5 weeks to determine them, else there's a right of appeal against non-determination. So whilst there is a call-in procedure allowed for in respect of them, I hope you realise it might be difficult for us to agree to that unless we've got the applicant's acquiescence to it. So that's it in a nutshell, Chairman. I think we'll see how things go and see how much of a take-up there is going forwards. Yes, an interesting initiative from the government in terms of trying to speed up, yet again, elements of the planning process.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Adams?
Yes, thank you, Steve. So when somebody presents PIP's application, one of these PIP's applications, how long will you have before it appears on our weekly list?
Okay, so it'll go on the weekly list in the normal manner. What
So
we
about
are
3 or 4 weeks after it's come in then?
Well, no, it will appear on the weekly list as soon as we've got it. We'll put it on that week's weekly list.
So it'll be validated then?
It will be validated pretty much on receipt.
Okay.
Yes, they're going to be fast tracked, and what we will be doing is notifying ward councillors and town and parish councils on the day of validation, which there's very little we need to supply with them. It's basically a form and a fee and a plan, and that's about it. So we'll be notifying you directly. We realise there's this challenge of getting news out there.
Okay.
So we'll be fast tracking them, a bit like we do with prior approvals. We'll be fast tracking them to get them in your inbox so you're aware of them, the towns and parishes are aware of them, and obviously getting letters to the neighbours pretty much as soon as they're validated.
So
Can I...
sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Adams, can you just turn you...
Sorry, yeah.
I don't really want to have this long two-way discussion between you and Steve in the meeting. That you can't, you know, by all means ask the questions specifically and then get an answer. I will take somebody else, so it's not that I'm trying to stop people asking questions, but this constant sort of two-way questioning. I just feel it's a bit like limbo dancing, you know, they're just getting us to jump through, well, to do more and more impossible things in an incredibly fast time and get it right. And I don't know that any of us will know what we're doing with this for quite a few weeks. Councillor King.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mine wasn't a question. Mine is actually to thank Steve very much indeed for an excellent email. I thought it summed up the whole process. I know exactly what it means. Somebody just muttered and said it was good as well, so thank you.
But I really do think we are, well, I think what it's telling us, it's certainly telling the officers, but it's telling us as members that we really have to be on the ball every time we get a list. We have to call in things, organise site visits really quickly. There's no putting it on the back burner anymore because everything's just being speeded up and we're going to be penalised if we don't get there in time. Councillor Piper?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a very quick question. Will it have a PIP identifier so that we can, on the list, we know that it's a PIP?
Yes.
So will it have an initial? I mean, so, and will we know what it means? Because I love the DWs and I still haven't worked out what they stand for. I call them don't worries. You know, I look at them, but I don't get terribly worried about it. But the PIP will have something else in front of it so that we know, yeah?
I think we'll probably have PIP actually, but don't quote me on that. I'll need to check the procedure note. But yes, certainly we're mindful of the need to highlight them and identify them because we'll need to be able to run reports on them in due course. And I think PIP is the identifier, which would be quite a good idea.
Right, as long as it doesn't get mixed up with your personal independence payment. Does anybody else wish to come in on that, or shall we move on? Right, well, it's you again, Steve, isn't it, I think, on our missing performance. I hope you all found the sheet at the back, our planning performance targets.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, apologies that this wasn't in your papers. It's the regular update in respect of our performance in relation to speed and quality. So if I just take you to the table, so you've got the figures there from April 17 to the end of April 18, and really, you know, excellent performance figures being maintained both in terms of majors and non-major applications, which is again testament to you know, the department's hard work and diligence in determining applications on time. In terms of the performance on quality. Again, as usual, the non-majors category, the figures are well below the threshold that we need to be worried about, so that's all good. And in respect to the majors performance on quality, as the months are going by, we can see that the current best estimate figures are receding from that 10% threshold. So again, that's a positive sign, and I think it's reflective of the benefits that we have now of the local plan, an up-to-date local plan in place. And we'll continue to update these as the month goes on. And I'm hoping to soon be able to be clear on what the next assessment period is going to be, because we've been waiting to find out what that is, rather than giving you a best estimate. So yes, more to come in future months, but a good picture and an improving one in respect of major appeals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to comment on those targets, Councillor Adams?
No, I think this is an excellent performance again, keeping the programme going well. Pleased to see the majors steadily coming down, as Steve said. Presumably there will shortly be another table in the middle, which is PIPs.
I find people very annoying when they start sentences with "so" all the time, but when I say, are there any questions, and you start with "no," it's even more confusing than if someone starts with "so." Right, does anybody else wish to comment on our targets? In which case, can we move to the main business of the evening, applications for planning permission? If there's a site inspection needed as a result of consideration of applications at this meeting, they'll be on Tuesday the 3rd of July. Gosh. The year is flying. This is application B1, WA 2018-0620, Bramble Cottage, Mill Lane in Chiddingfold. This is an application under section 73 to vary a condition. And Louise, I think, is going to take us through this.
Thank you, Chairman. This application has been brought before the committee as the applicant is an employee of the council, and the recommendation is for approval. The site is located on the northern side of Mill Lane in Chiddingfold and is occupied by a detached dwelling house. These photographs show the existing property. The first on the left shows the front of the property, the second shows the side of the property, and the final photo on the bottom shows the side wrapping round to the rear of the property. Permission has previously been granted for the erection of a part single-storey, part two-storey side extension to the north of the property, which is here, and for a porch to the front of the property, which is here. This slide shows the elevations, and the application is for some amendments to that previously approved permission. A gable porch is proposed here to the front of the property. The two roof lights are proposed to be added here to the west of the property, and a window is proposed to be removed from the scheme here. In addition, this first floor window that I'm indicating now here, this was previously required to be obscure glazed by condition and fixed shut in order to prevent a loss of privacy to the adjoining neighbour. This application proposes that condition to be amended to allow the window to open on one casement side by a maximum of 100 millimetres, except in the event of an emergency where the window could be opened to allow emergency escape. Officers are satisfied that that amendment to the condition would also protect the neighbour's privacy, which the original condition was intended to serve. The final amendment to the scheme is that the first floor would be painted brick to match the existing property rather than timber clad, which was proposed in the approved application. This slide shows the proposed floor plans with the ground floor at the top of your screen and the first floor to the bottom left, with finally the roof plan at the bottom right. In conclusion, the proposal would have an acceptable impact on all the matters of principal and technical opinion which relate to the ancient woodland, biodiversity, the SPAs and highway safety and parking provision. And the matters for members' judgment this evening are the impact on visual amenity and the character of the countryside in the AONB and AGLV, and on residential amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Members? Councillor, my brain's gone.
I'm new here, Chairman. You wouldn't know me. Just a quick question. I'm fascinated by the idea of a window that should only be open by 100 millimetres, but can be opened fully in the event of an emergency. What's the mechanism for that? And if you like, how can we prevent abuse? What if there's a perpetual emergency?
So it's effectively a catch on the window, which allows it to be open only that small amount, but can be opened and forced in the event of an emergency. It would be up to our enforcement team to investigate any breaches of enforcement should there be the window opened at occasions other than emergency escape.
Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chairman, and congratulations on your appointment. Just looking at the elevations, I've got no problem with this application at all. My only comment is that if you look at the top left-hand elevation, we have a system within the planning that we actually have different levels when we do extensions. Now, I would much prefer to see that extension in the current roof line. Okay, what we have at the front is an extension with a slope roof, and then it goes back, and the roof line is lower, and it just doesn't look right. It looks out of balance in that case. I do, you know, I know it's part of our, you know, our planning, but we should look at this in future and decide what's best on an individual basis. Thank you.
Do you wish to reply to that, Louise?
Yeah, the only comment I would make is that the extension itself is located to the rear of the property here, so wouldn't be visible from the street scene, but I take your point. But officers do consider that what has been put forward by the applicant is acceptable. A different design may also have been acceptable as well. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to comment, or shall we move straight to the recommendation on this one? You sure? Right, move to the recommendation, and the recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 7 in your report and informatives 1 to 5, that permission be granted. Can I see all those in favour of that recommendation, please?
That's unanimous.
I take it I can leave it at that then, can I? Thank you very much. Moving on to item B2, WA 2018-0657, Southlands Church Road in Hindhead, the erection of a garage storage building following demolition of the existing outbuilding. And once again, I think it's Louise who's going to present this for us.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is recommended for refusal. The site is located on the south side of Church Road and is occupied by a detached dwelling and associated outbuildings. These photographs show the existing on-site situation. The first photograph on the left shows the existing outbuildings which would be demolished as part of the proposal, and the second photograph shows the existing dwelling on the site. The proposal would be located to the northwest of the property here. This is the site of the existing outbuildings which I showed you in the previous slide, which would be demolished. This slide shows the existing outbuildings which are proposed to be demolished. The demolished outbuildings would be replaced by a large detached outbuilding with a width of 13.6 metres, a depth of 12 metres and a height of 6.07 metres. The outbuilding would have a free bay garage, 2 separate storage areas and a WC at ground floor level, and a plant room and storage area at first floor level, which is this on the right. This application is identical to a scheme that was refused in February for the reason which is on your screen now. This recent decision is a material consideration which members should give considerable weight. The applicants have put forward that the proposal is similar to an existing outbuilding on the adjacent property at Little Fir House. However, as you can see from the table, the proposal would have a significantly greater width, depth, footprint, floor area and height to that which is on the adjacent site. This slide shows the outbuilding that has been permitted on the adjacent site at Little Fir House, and as you can see, it is smaller than the proposal in this application. And finally, this photograph is a photo of what is on site at Little Fir House. In conclusion, the proposal would have an acceptable impact on the matters of principle and technical opinion which relate to ancient woodland, biodiversity, the SPAs and highway safety and parking. The matters of members' judgment are the impact on visual amenity, the character of the countryside and the AONB and AGLV, and on residential amenity. In addition, members are reminded that they should give weight to the recent refusal for the identical proposal on the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Louise. Can I ask a rather silly question? When you say identical, you do mean identical. There is no change whatsoever from what has been refused and is at appeal.
That's correct. It is identical to the refuse scheme, which is currently at appeal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Mulliner.
I went up to look at the site this afternoon, and my feeling at that point, before this point about identical nature of the application had been made, was to suggest actually we have a deferral for a site visit. But certainly if the two applications are identical, then I agree it's inappropriate to basically completely turn on our heads and grant something which was previously refused and has gone to appeal. As one colleague said, it's basically preempting the inspector's decision. My own feeling is, having been there, that there's nothing unreasonable in the principle of having a larger garage. The one that is there now is a very flat building, and I think members would greatly benefit from seeing the site for themselves, providing that the applicant understands that the way forward is to put in a genuinely different application and let that be looked at. But it's one of those things where you have a very large site. The house is certainly impressive. It's set down a fraction from the garage, actually, and although it's quite massive, it's not as massive as the height of the chimney might lead you to believe on its own. So there is, I can understand why the officers are not very happy with the sheer bulk of what is proposed. But having said that, it's a classic case, I think, where members should be able to come to their own view, having seen it in its setting, decide whether or not they think it's reasonable. But it would be very wise of the applicant to take the hint that something slightly smaller and definitely different from what's just been refused already should be his next step. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. And as we have said before, it is our behaviour that will be under scrutiny, our reasonableness, our consistency, and I think we have to bear this in mind when we're looking at this particular application. Does any other member wish to comment? Councillor Edwards first, then Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, one question to the officers. I believe this was decided under delegated power last time. Am I right in thinking that?
That's correct, yes.
I did write to you last time explaining my reservations on the reasons for refusal of this application. Having visited the site myself, I can understand the ward members' concern at the refusal, and I did write and say that it would go to appeal if we didn't do all our considerations properly. I can't see personally any problem with this application. And I take on board what Councillor Mulliner has said, and I agree with him that, it would be seen as a retrograde step to allow this to go through. It was exactly the same. And I would, I would actually agree that the applicant needs to revisit this and put in a different application. But I would, as a resident, I would be most upset with the decision that's been made. And I can understand his frustration. That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Can I just say two things, Councillor Edwards? One, that the councillor was free to call in the application last time. That is your whatever, your, I'm going to say responsibility, but it's not that, but you are entitled to do that. Entitlement will do. And it wasn't called in. And whoever makes the decision, whether it's delegated or whether we make it as a committee, it is a Waverley decision. And that is where the consistency comes. So, we have to be very sure that what we're making the decision on, and this decision was made on planning grounds by the officers, refused and has gone to appeal. And this is where we are now. So I really don't want to prolong this too much because that is the situation. Come back, Mike.
I understand that exactly, and I'm not arguing with that. It's just that I made the point last time. That's all I'm saying. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
I think that one of the things that we've been very strong on in the new local plan is to take into account the new developments in the countryside. This is in the AONMB, I see, although it is outside the green belt. But this is an enormous development in addition to the previous low-level garages that were there. I can't see any justification, to be honest, for turning over the officer's original decision.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Does anybody else wish to speak? I shall move straight to the recommendation. Right, in that case, shall we move to the recommendation, which is the end of your report, that permission be refused for the reason noted in the agenda report. Can I see all those, please, in favour of that recommendation?
No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And those opposed to that recommendation? Any abstentions?
1.
Thank you very much. Permission is refused.
Chairman, could I beg your indulgence and just suggest to officers, if this does come back in a different guise, could we make sure that a site visit is actually held?
Yeah, that's fine.
Again, that is the local member's responsibility to ask for it to come to committee and to ask for a site visit. And if you do it at the same time and keep chipping away, you usually get what you want. And both the chairman and myself are always willing to go on site visits. In fact, that's how we usually meet, frequently on site visits. So, you know, we're not opposed to them, but we do, especially now with the new PIPs, we're going to have to get our site visits in as quickly as we can. We've got to really concentrate now. It's going to be quite a rush. But yes, I agree with you. I think it would be a good one to put forward for both bringing it into committee and a site visit. Thank you. Oh, what is the... Oh. Right, I'm supposed to go back to the agenda and say the exclusion of press and public, but as they've already gone and there isn't any. Thank you very much indeed. Pleasant journey home.